Great.
So we are being recorded.
Hi, Chair Nicholas. Looks like folks are joining. Welcome as you get settled for the afternoon. Okay. How's everybody doing?
Fine, thank you.
Great.
Hi, good afternoon.
How are you?
Pretty good. I think Myra's in the best situation. It looks like you have popcorn.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
I was rushing to get it up here.
Hi, Chair Nicholas. Was that you?
Yes, it's me, but I'm having a hard time. I'm on my phone. I would like to use that as.
Okay. I see folks are still joining.
Yes, it's just checking my audio.
Welcome. Hi.
Thank you, it's Bobby. Thank you.
Hi, Bobby.
Somebody close the door.
Hi, Liliana.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Okay, looks like folks are still joining. Hi, Kayla.
Hi.
Okay. Chair Nicholas, you almost ready?
Can you hear me?
We can. Hi.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I don't know why oh, now I have double. This one, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. But it seems like I have an echo.
Are you on your phone and a laptop?
Hello? Can you hear me?
We
Yes, I
can. Yeah.
Now, do I still have an echo? Oh, Lord. Is Tony or Howard, can you just unmute one of them?
I'm
Sorry.
right here. So I don't hear any echo on my end.
Okay. So if that's the case, maybe it's just
I-
me here, an echo.
Are you logged in with your phone and a laptop?
Yes, I have to because earlier you can't hear me. Actually, I logged on very early.
So what you can do is on the laptop.
Uh-huh.
So if you press the audio option on the left corner,
Yes, I do.
click that one, and then it will give you a phone option. So you have to switch to phone.
I am on the phone too. That's
So
okay. If I'm the only one who can hear the echo, I'll figure this one out.
Okay, I'm not hearing any echo. So
If anybody's okay with it, I'm the only one, that's fine. So,
Sounds good.
okay. The meeting for the Mayor's Commission on Racial and Social Equity is called to order today, September 2nd, 2020. So we'll proceed with the roll call. Edith Arias,
Here.
Jeff Asupardi,
I'm here.
Gladys Balmas. Do I see Gladys? Norm Faria,
here.
Mike Futrell,
Here.
Basan, Vanessa McGovern,
I'm here.
Hermes Monson, Pat Murray, City Council Member Mark Nogales, Kayla Powers,
I'm here.
Liliana Rivera,
Here.
Bobby Vaughn,
Here.
Andrea Fernandez,
Here.
and myself, Flora Nicholas.
And Hermes Monzon just joined.
Oh, okay. Do we have a quorum?
Yes.
Great. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome for joining us today in our third meeting. We are halfway through our phase one, the information gathering phase, wherein we will review the information about context, community concerns, and best practices. Note that we extended our meeting by 30 minutes to allow for more voices to be heard. Unfortunately, between our last meeting and today, another African-American man was shot and seriously injured over a week ago in front of his 3 young sons. The shooting was followed by protests and clashes, further dividing our nation, which led to 2 protesters being fatally shot. While it's important to learn from the past and the most recent incidences, we have a short window to dramatically impact the future at the systemic level. We encourage you to use past information, data, and stories as a starting point. We must remember that great things happen to our country when we are together, thus we should resist being divided. Being united does not mean we have to agree with everyone. As Martin Luther King said, unity has never meant uniformity. For me, it means that we should strive together to find a common ground and continue to seek solutions that we can live with moving forward. Due to the heightened awareness of the inequities that exist, we should continue to commit to work towards a fair and just society for all of us here in South City. Unlike some of you, I'm not a lifelong resident of the city. I came here as an adult with my husband and 2 young children. 32 years have passed, which may be longer than some of your lifetime. I'm always grateful for the support I received from the community while raising my children, who are now successful adults and proud South San Francisco residents. This is also the place where I now have 2 grandchildren. This may be the place where we will watch the sun go down. What we accomplish here is important to me and my family as people of color. The nagging question is, how do you want to be? Be a part of the problem or be a part of the solution? When we point a finger, remember there are 3 more pointing back at you. Dr. King reminded us to work together because we may have all come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. This commission is positioned to make changes, and we want to facilitate the process by guiding the focus towards solutions, potential policy that will support goals well into the future, and an openness for new ways of doing things. So the next item then will be the approval of our minutes from the last meeting. Before we approve, are there any edits to the meeting minutes? I don't see anything in the chat. So I'm assuming that everybody has read it and are ready to approve or disapprove. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there any second?
I'll second that.
So if you approve, click raise hand in the bottom right corner of the participants and Oh, finally,
They're approved.
my video working.
So approved.
Great. So the goals for the meeting today is understanding the landscape of community safety and policing in South San Francisco, reviewing the opportunities to reduce structural institutional racism and racial inequities related to the community safety and policing. We will also hear from our guest speaker, Mr. Cesar Rodriguez. Gathering commissioner feedback on examples approaches will follow, and hopefully we'll be able to identify 1 to 2 approaches to move forward. Oh, and definitely we will have public comment later. By the way, last August 26th, the City Council meeting, we wanted to share with you that we passed a resolution suggested by Change SSF that underlines the city's ongoing commitment to racial and social equity. Now I will pass it over to Kim Dorman from Ramey and Associates.
Hi, everybody. It's really nice to see you today. Thanks for joining. I'm here. My name is Kim Dorman, again, with Ramey and Associates, and I'm here with my colleague, Paige Cruza and Nayeli Bernal, also from Ramey and Associates. And as Chair Nicholas mentioned, we have a full agenda. I won't go through everything except for to say, because I think it was covered by Chair Nicholas. Item 3D has been incorporated into the best and promising practices presentation in B. So after Cesar Rodriguez presents, then we'll have Commissioner Q&A. So just as a reminder, next slide, please. We wanted to make sure that everyone is clear, as again, Commissioner Nicholas mentioned, we're in phase 1, and that will be continuing in phase 1 through October. And this phase is really focused on identifying options, example approaches, but we're not actually making decisions yet. Those decisions will be made in phase 2, and then we'll get specific and develop action plans in phase 3. So right now, we're really thinking about various approaches, and we'll have an opportunity to investigate those approaches and then bring them back to you in phase 2 to prioritize. Actually, Ernest and I were speaking, and he suggested maybe breaking into small groups. And as I mentioned to you, Commissioner Hermes, we're going to be doing small group breakouts more in phase 2 when we have more time to spend together in small groups. In this phase, we're really trying to cover a lot of territory. So just wanted to recognize that. I also wanted to remind people of the group agreements that we identified in our last meeting. Actually at the beginning of our process. And I think really one of the main points of the group agreements for me is to emphasize that we're here to do something together that we can't do alone. And I think that's really the aim of focusing on our common goal. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity to continue to build relationships. And of course, part of that is to being open to new ideas and making sure that those who haven't participated are able to participate as we continue our conversations. So the meeting topics, as I think everyone knows, but just as a quick reminder for phase 1, include what we've already covered, health and social services. Today, we're going to be talking about community safety or public safety and policing. And then our next meeting will focus on education and economic development, followed by housing and housing affordability. And I think most of us are familiar now with the technology, that page, if you could just review that a little bit.
Yes, the main thing is really if you're having a hard time hearing, please use the call-in number. I know that Chair Floor is already modeling that very well, so you can continue to participate. And then we have a few updates from the prior meetings. We've been trying to get used to this virtual meeting environment with a large group, and so are making a few changes. So we are limiting members of the public from chatting until public comment. They'll still be able to, you will still be able to chat during the public comment period, but we're not going to have members of the public rather be able to chat to panelists during the meeting. And then for commissioners, we'll invite you to use the chat during the various Q&A sections of the agenda, but we are hoping that you will really take the opportunity to speak in person with one another rather than using the chat and not speaking aloud. And so we are asking people to limit the chats to any technical issues that you're having or very brief clarifying questions that then we can bring up right away. And if you do have to call in and you need to raise your hand, you can dial *9. And I realize I just
and
said that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just say, as a facilitator, I really want to hear what people have to say, and it's hard for me to listen and to read, quite honestly. So this is a work in progress, and really invite folks to, participate via raising your hand and then speaking, if that's okay. All right. So we wanted to also give you an update on, the next slide, the approaches that in our last meeting you all identified as wanting to know more about. So as you remember, you all prioritize, we identified a couple of approaches to investigate further, number 1 and number 8, and wanted to let you know that movement has already been taking place behind the scenes. So specifically related to creating a response team for mental health crises, substance use, and homelessness. Conversations with the county have already started, exploring a pilot program to embed a mental health professional with the South San Francisco Police Department. And then also related to number 8, developing and or expanding the Community Navigator or Promotora program. The City of South San Francisco is looking into a new program of community promotoras to reach non-English speaking residents. So we'll keep you updated as time goes by, but wanted to let you know that we're already kind of moving forward with those, and we'll bring back information at a later point. So let's take a look at the local context related to racial inequities, racism, community safety, and policing. These data were included in your pre-read packets. But we also wanted to take a minute to highlight some data that we think would be helpful for this conversation to lift up. So first of all, we wanted to start with a kind of a bigger picture perspective, looking at racial inequities in criminal justice. And specifically, in the top graph, we see that while Black people make up 6.3% of the population in California, they make up 15.1% of those who are stopped. This is an example of disproportionality. That's a term that we'll be using throughout this presentation. And then similarly, in the second graph, it shows that while Black people make up 9.7% of drivers involved in traffic collisions, they make up 13.4% of those given traffic violations. So again, an example of disproportionality. In the next slide, we see on the right, so on the right over there, we see that Black residents in San Mateo County are more likely than other racial and ethnic groups to be incarcerated. And the rate for San Mateo County is higher than the rate for the state of California. Here we see that Black and Latinx civilians experience higher rates of use of force in San Mateo County compared to other racial ethnic groups. So again, another example of disproportionality. And finally, on a national level, white defendants are 25% more likely than Black defendants to have their charge dropped or reduced to a lesser crime. And Black people are more likely to have a pretrial detention and are given higher bail amounts compared to white people with similar charges and criminal history. So all of these examples are racial inequities or disproportionalities. So next we wanted to also provide a highlight of the pre-read, some of the data in the pre-read packet related to South San Francisco's police department. As you might already know, the police department has many functions ranging from maintaining public order and safety to responding to emergencies. And here we see both the population breakdown for South San Francisco on the right, alongside the demographics for the South San Francisco Police Department on the left. The top chart is SFF Police Department employees overall, and the lower is sworn officers, those who have weapons. And there's a couple takeaways here. I think one is that there's a greater percentage of white people in the police department compared to the larger SFF population. So 48% in the police department compared to 19% in the general population. And at the same time, the police department is made up of over 50% people of color. So the police department conducts rigorous hiring processes that include interviewing and conducting background checks to make sure not to hire anyone with serious disciplinary record in another police department. And then once hired, members of the police department go through initial training, so some examples of those are there, and then also ongoing trainings, those included some examples on the right. I know this is a lot of information, but just want to keep moving along here. So the budget for the South San Francisco Police Department is 27% of the general fund. So it's down at the bottom where the arrow is. And 90% of the police department budget is spent on salaries and benefits. So a number of the commissioners asked for more information related to understanding interactions with the police department. So we looked at the 911 calls, which is one of the main ways that the police department interacts with community members. There were approximately 67,700 calls from the community to 911 each year between 2016 and 2019. And then each call is categorized, as you can see on the right there, in one of the 5 priority areas. And so, as you can see in this graph, the large majority of the calls were related to priority 3. So missing adults, stolen vehicle reports, suspicious circumstances, fireworks, and municipal code violations. So in this slide on the left, we see that there's arrest data and traffic citation data by race ethnicity. And we see that Latinx and whites are those who are arrested most often in South San Francisco. Also important to note is that between 2016 and 2020, most arrests involved non-residents. And you can see that in the italics there. So depending on the year, between 58 and 63% annually. And then on the right, we see that Latinx and whites and those who identify as other are given traffic citations more often than other racial groups, racial ethnic groups. So here we also, a number of commissioners were interested in understanding how officers are investigated. And there are two main ways that investigations take place in the police department. One is if there's a citizen complaint, and then the other is if there's a department-initiated investigation. So in the last 5 years, there were 29 citizen complaints and 54, so you can see the bottom there, citizen complaints 29, and 54 departmental investigations. So that's department-initiated investigations. And so it's one of the takeaways, I think, is that there were more investigations from within the department than those created through citizen complaints. And also, I think, we're thinking about metrics and indicators. I think this is an indicator that the department takes reports of possible wrongdoing seriously and investigates. So 8 Can't Wait, I think, and probably everyone is familiar with this, but just in case, 8 Can't Wait refers to policies to reduce use of force. And the SSS Police Department complies with all 8 policies and notes that there might be exceptions related to 2 of the policies in exceedingly rare cases. Since 2010, the South San Francisco Police Department has expanded their community engagement activities, and there's a number of them, but they include a neighborhood response team, a youth academy, youth summer camp, and creating a homeless outreach team through a collaboration with Life Moves. So I think, what we were thinking of doing now is to move into best and promising practices. I haven't checked the chat because I've been focusing on just presenting the information. We'll take a look at the chat and see if there's any clarifying questions. And if there's any additional information that we don't have for you today, we can take those questions and look into the data and get back to you with more information. So Paige.
So we are going to, again, present some example approaches and before we do that, wanted to share selected best practices and promising practices really focused on what are things that can be done to reduce racial inequities, get at kind of root causes of racial inequities in the criminal justice system, and also reduce institutional and structural racism related to policing in the criminal justice system. And so we really are trying to stay focused around thinking about what policies, programs, and practices will reduce racial inequities in South San Francisco, and what approaches will reduce structural and/or institutional racism. So I know we gave the commissioners a lot of pre-reads. Hopefully you were able to get through them. But we've summarized kind of some of the key takeaway points on the left, and then link them over to some possible approaches, which again, we'll go into some more detail later on in the meeting, ways that they could be operationalized basically within the city or partners. So main theme of best practices really is increasing transparency and accountability, especially around making policies and data publicly available and gathering community input on department policies and data or agency policies and data, and communicating the reasons for policy decisions with the public. Addressing bias, including implicit bias. So really reviewing specific interactions where racial inequities can come up, again, whether intentional or implicit, and identifying when there are those racial disproportionalities, like the data that Kim highlighted around traffic stops being disproportionately for Black people compared to their involvement in collisions or compared to the percent of the population for the state. Another best practice is really building community trust and positive relationships between police departments and community groups, especially members of historically marginalized communities, and really emphasizing the importance of treating people with dignity and respect, including listening to everyone's side, and communicating clearly about decisions and actions or reasons or rationale. Another best practice and promising practice is expanding community-based safety approaches. So that can mean leveraging community member skills and relationships to support conflict resolution. So that in general means if people are fighting or arguing, right, we want people to be able to be good neighbors and interact with people to really calm things down before they might get to a point of physical violence. Or if someone is having some mental health challenges, we want to be able to direct them to resources or provide them with support before it gets to the point of a crisis situation. And then finally, one of the documents around procedurally just policing, which is quite a piece of jargon or quite a wonky word, is really boils down to fair processes that one of the kind of key components of addressing racial inequities with criminal justice and other systems where there are authority figures is ensuring that people actually feel like they have been treated fairly. And that goes for police, teachers, judges, kind of a range of authority figures. And because we know that people of color experience racism, we want to make sure that that policies and practices change so that they are not intentionally or unintentionally racist. And we also want to address the long history that we have of bias being very real and the impact being very real. And so one of the ways to do that is to really consistently across all groups of people ensure that people are treated respectfully, listen to their perspective, make sure that it's communicated kind of that there is that people are doing things for the right reasons and for the good of community, kind of aligned with our commission group agreements, and explaining why and how decisions are made.
Thank you, Paige. So I'm very pleased to present Cesar Rodriguez from San Francisco State University and on behalf of Change SSF. Cesar?
Hello, everyone.
Take it away.
Thank you very much. My name is Cesar Che Rodriguez. I'm son of Berta Chavez Cisneros and Miguel Rodriguez Morales. I'd like to acknowledge that I am a guest on traditional unceded Uriburi Ohlone land. I'm a professor in criminal justice studies at San Francisco State, and I'm speaking here. I have the pleasure of speaking here as a member of Change SSF on alternatives to criminalization. Thank you for your time and attention. I wanted to let folks know that I've made modifications out of time and other considerations, so the presentation cannot fully represent the analysis of Change SSF. So just as a disclaimer, I'm leaving out some comments about some analysis on perceptions and reality of the criminal justice system and violent crime, which I think are important given common reactions when we talk about alternatives that people have, as well as how the criminal justice system reproduces racial and social inequality, and how that informs the proposals to pursue alternatives, including to defund the police. I welcome questions on those matters after, as well as limits on common reforms. I welcome questions on those matters after my presentation. Nonetheless, in the interest of time and conviviality, I'd like to, I will be sharing the what to do and not so much the why to do it. And I'm happy to explain a bit more about the why. So, you know, what I'd like to do here is if maybe we could fast forward to the slide called strategy. Thank you to Kim and Paige for your support with this. And I'll just go into this right now. So people talk about changing budgetary priorities, or people have talked, you've heard it on the streets, to defund policing, and to invest into community-based strategies that maximize well-being. Part of that is given the way that the criminal justice system can reproduce racial and social inequality, and therefore to take money from those, from that leading budgetary item into other alternatives that can still address real social issues without reproducing social inequality. Right. So it's a matter of changing budgetary priorities. We talk about also now, one thing I want to share is about delinking community programs from law enforcement. And I want to share that this is a recommendation from Law Enforcement Action Partnership known as LEAP. They have produced a document. There's a hyperlink there. It's been signed by over 90 retired and or active law enforcement officers and administrators. And they're taking a similar position on this as, for example, the Major Cities Chiefs Association and other law enforcement associations, particularly chiefs of police associations, that, for example, have asked that local law enforcement not be linked to federal immigration law on account that would deter local immigrants from cooperating with local law enforcement. So, so talking about delinking law enforcement from these community programs and alternatives is important because people who have survived trauma or who have been criminalized may not come forward and use a resource if they fear being treated as a criminal before being treated as a victim or a client. So this is the case for people with substance use issues. Family members, if they find out that a loved one is having trouble with heroin, won't necessarily report their child to law enforcement because they fear that may incriminate their child. Instead, they'll take them to counseling programs, right? If we look at unauthorized migrants, local law enforcement have taken positions to not enforce local immigration, federal immigration law, so that they can still cooperate and work with immigrants, right? So I ask that folks consider this, given that there's discussion of a response team being developed for mental health crises, substance use, and homelessness, and there's a possibility that it would be housed in the police department. I invite folks to think about delinking that program or that strategy from law enforcement. And most importantly, one of the best ways to reduce some of the frictions, the reproduction of racial and social inequality, is to reduce contact between the police and public. Now, I'm drawing this from a recommendation provided by the APHA, the largest organization and gathering of public health professionals, who produced a policy statement, which is hyperlinked there as well. And so the strategy then is to develop alternative strategies to address real social issues with non-punitive approaches that do not reproduce inequalities. And I want to share this for y'all. I want to say that this is good for law enforcement officers as well. There's a reality of ghost skins in law enforcement, folks who may pursue this career for nefarious purposes. But I like to think that the majority of cops mean well when they go pursue this line of profession. And I like to think that, and I'm sure they do not wake up that day or go to their shift saying, today I want to harm someone. Today I want to harm someone with mental illness. No, they're being deployed and asked to respond to these cases. And when we as a society can develop alternative strategies to address things like people with mental health crises in the streets, so that could ameliorate things for law enforcement as well. All right. So I want us to think about this as a win-win strategy. Now we can move forward to people with mental illness. The slide on that, I believe that's next. Jails are our default mental health institutions without any of the training nor facilities necessary to humanely treat people with mental illness. And it's much more expensive. So I didn't get a chance to add this. My apologies to Kim and Paige, but Mental Health First Oakland, developing teams of professional civilians trained to respond to people in mental health crises would be something that we can cultivate and develop. Mental Health First Oakland is developing this already. And I believe that it's been worked out in Sacramento. Developing mental health assisted living centers. So instead of having, law enforcement officers pick someone up with mental health issues who perhaps broke a law and having them, be put into jail where they won't be able to, where they don't have the resources necessary to work with them. Instead, it's much more affordable and humane to develop mental health assisted living centers that are voluntary. We don't want to reproduce asylums. Culturally appropriate, especially given the diversity of our society, community-based, and therefore economically and geographically accessible. Miami-Dade is looking into these things. I want to just add one more that wasn't on there. Accessible counseling. Clínica Martín Baró in the Mission. This is a student organized free clinic in the Mission, the product of a collaboration between UCSF and San Francisco State. They provide primary care, patient health workshops, but also culturally relevant mental health therapy. They're providing it to largely Spanish-speaking immigrants. That could be helpful. So these are things that would be alternatives to be able to address something like mental health in the streets. People with mental health issues that, and so law enforcement wouldn't have to respond to that. Housing. The fundamental problem of homelessness is a mismatch between the cost of housing and worker income, something a lot of people in the Bay Area may be very familiar with. My generation, we can't afford to live in South San Francisco. Many of us have to move out. And I want to say that this is important for us to consider, given that let's have faith in the capacity of this task force to produce real change. If that is the case, if we don't protect working class families vis-a-vis housing, working class communities of color would not be able to reap the benefits of this commission. So that's why I say this is important. And again, delinking these from policing, because you might encounter people with substance abuse issues, right? But teams of civilians trained to reach out to homeless persons and link them to resources. San Francisco's homeless outreach team is an example. Drop-in centers with no restrictions that are gateways to people who come in for services, everything from shower and the like, and get connected to health and social services without restrictions. This is already occurring in our own backyard with the Mission Neighborhood Center in San Francisco. There was one example of bread and jams in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which unfortunately went out of commission. Housing first strategies. Recall that our jails become our default mental health institutions, especially somewhere like LA County. It's very expensive and inhumane. Republican Utah found it cheaper and more humane to place people in housing first, instead of sending them to jails, rather than to cycle in and out of jail. And then they were able to connect them to services, and folks had better results. People were able to get on their feet, address substance use issues, and get connected to work and other things. Now, the other thing is income supplements, just to prevent people from falling out of housing. This, again, a fundamental issue of homelessness is the mismatch between wages and rent. And this is especially necessary in times of COVID. Those of us who've been paying attention to the news know about the looming eviction, the possibility of mass evictions. Now, going beyond kind of like what to do about homeless people that are homeless, what can we do to prevent folks from doing that? And that's where I share this on the right-hand side. Just cause evictions with no loopholes. I didn't get a chance to add this in time, but I'm throwing an audible here. My apologies, Kim and Paige, but rent control. Tenants unions, especially with migrants, this can help tenants for being preyed upon or capitulating on rights and protections that they don't know about, and then wind up being evicted or kicked out, right? So tenants unions to help people if they get a letter from their landlord about, hey, what do I do about this? They can connect them to resources and the like. Shifting publicly held vacant land into community land trusts, which acquire, own, develop, manage land on behalf of community. Grants, public grants to support the formation of limited equity cooperatives. These are member resident. So this is like a non-commodified form of housing where members own shares of a cooperative corporation that owns the building. And then therefore they can secure long-term rights to occupancy and preserve an affordable housing. And providing tenants the right of first refusal to purchase property when it's being sold. Now, instead of gang task force, here's some things I'd like for us to consider. Early childhood education, like, instead of, what movie was that with NWA, right? Instead of having the tanks come in barreling in with battering rams, one of the best things we could do is to provide early childhood education. Children who've gone to participate in high quality early childhood education go farther in school, earn higher incomes, pay more in taxes, and are less likely to be entangled in the criminal justice system. So this is making an investment in the lives of people early on, as opposed to paying costs at the end or the middle of their lives. Moreover, this allows working mothers to pursue employment, which helps lift families out of poverty. There's a documentary that I've linked there that's a really great, and I'm sorry you're hearing my dog. My apologies about that. He's passionate about these matters. Community centers like Rise in Richmond and Homeboy Industries in LA. If you click that link on Homeboy Industries, it's linked to a text that provides information about what Homeboy Industries does in Los Angeles. But they have a trauma and healing informed approach. So rather than asking people what is wrong with you, it's a matter of asking what happened to you and how can we help address things. So it's not assuming that people are pathological, need to be eliminated from society, but rather that they have experienced trauma and have and are carrying that. They provide healing-informed, culturally relevant programming. A great example of that, by the way, is the Legacy Youth Project here in our backyard in Napa that's working with children of migrants. They provide wraparound services from counseling to college admissions. So Homeboy Industries does a lot of amazing work for folks in that regard. Moreover, facilities and opportunities for farming, culture, arts, music, film. I don't want us to just think about stopping crime, but I want us to think about investing into the lives of young people in our community in order to maximize the talent and ability that is here in our backyard, right? And so this cultivates young people and provides them plenty of opportunities. Rise, Romeo is Bleeding documentary comes out of Rise, creative young people. If anyone ever heard of the Turf Fiends in Oakland, these young men that dance and have, they have no, it looks like they got no ligaments in their joints, but they're amazing dancers and they come out of Youth Uprising. Something else that I didn't add in here, community medics. These are young people trained in emergency responses. Children who learn how to save a life are less likely to take a life, right? In that regard, what are called peace builders or the cure violence model developed by Gary Slutkin. There's a link to his work there. He applies a public health approach to violence interruption. If you've ever been struck by violence, if you've ever been punched, you've been infected by violence. You most likely want to spread that violence. So they talk about disrupting the spread of violence. And how do you do that? You hire people with credibility in the neighborhood. These can be formerly incarcerated and formerly gang involved people who have credibility but are later stage of their life and they want to give back. Position them in places where they can help build peace in the neighborhood. They are unarmed, they know the streets, they can hear of rumors and work with someone who survived a beating, stabbing, or shooting, and then work to disrupt the spread of violence, right? And in fact, work to build peace in the neighborhood. A slightly different model of this, but it's going on in our backyard, is the City of Richmond's Office of Neighborhood Safety. They use a focused deterrence model, which is a little bit different, but nonetheless there. And then the other thing is employment with living wages and benefits. There's the Planting Justice model. That's they provide a reentry program. We can have folks that are formerly incarcerated come and do work.
Okay, looks like we may have lost Cesar for at least a moment. Kim, do you want to, because we're not sure if we're going to get him back, do you want to give highlights on this and the last slide for him, and then we'll move to questions? Sure.
So let's see if Cesar comes back. But meanwhile, I think, we wanted to include some of the additional topics that are going to be relevant in our next meeting. So for example, we'll be talking next time about education. So some of the alternatives that Cesar is highlighting here will be relevant for that conversation as well. K through 12 ethnic studies curriculum, health and wellness initiatives. I think, again, the idea of focusing on, oh, and you're back.
Yeah.
Hi, Cesar.
Hey,
I was just moving on a little bit and moving us through. I was just mentioning that we're going to be talking about education in our next meeting, but I think, the ideas that you bring here are really relevant for supporting prevention in particular.
Thank
I
you.
think that's what you were highlighting before. So maybe just finishing up there, and then you want to just talk about the police accountability
Sure.
point before? Yeah, thanks.
Sure. I'm happy to talk a bit more about oh, by the way, community-based transformative justice, community restorative justice opportunities in communities to ameliorate conflicts in neighborhoods is something that, and there's a link to that. Baltimore has been doing work on that. Schools, this is very important. I'm happy to share more about that. I've shared information with the school board about a variety of programs that are occurring in our backyard. And I want to share a bit about the police accountability and transparency. I think number one, compliance with SB 978, which requires law enforcement to post all their standards, policies, practices, procedures, education, and training. This is important, for example, vis-a-vis so citizens can know about their privacy rights. And then also, for example, trainings. There have been, if you've studied some of these things, you've heard about, you may have heard of people like Dave Grossman, the killologist. These are people who train law enforcement officers to have a warrior mentality of I'd rather be judged by 12 rather than carried by 6. So they train law enforcement officers to view things as potentially fatal situations. Therefore, a lot of law enforcement officers are react quickly with guns. For example, William J. Lewinsky. There's questions about what he calls science. He's been called pseudoscientific by actual social scientists. Nonetheless, he's come in and trained law enforcement. So I think citizens have a right to know about who's training the law enforcement and what the content therein is. BART, in the aftermath of the Oscar Grant shooting, an investigation found out that BART was very lax with their use of force reporting. Law enforcement officers could commit use of force, could use force, but were not required to report it. Now, anytime an officer in BART uses force, they have to report it immediately. It then subsequently gets investigated by civilians. They have a civilian oversight board. So that'd be a model to look at in terms of use of force reporting and investigations by civilians. That critique of BART police came from the Myers-Nevy. BART normally would have had done an internal investigation into themselves. However, because their legitimacy was bankrupt in the aftermath of the Oscar Grant shooting, they wound up having to outsource their internal affairs investigation to the Myers-Nevy law firm, which I believe is in San Leandro. And they conducted a personnel investigation to the law enforcement officers that were on the platform the night Oscar Grant was shot and killed. And that produced that was a publicly available. There was 2 versions of the report, one that was publicly available and another one that was privately available due to the privacy restrictions that are exclusive to law enforcement officers. But having external personnel investigations would be important given the conflict of interest between investigating themselves and protecting legitimacy. And finally, special prosecutors, given the structural, let alone the interpersonal relationship between law enforcement officers and agencies and district attorneys. District attorneys may not have, because they rely upon law enforcement officers to clear cases, may not have an incentive to prosecute law enforcement officers because it may jeopardize their ability to have a working relationship with those agencies and our officers. So these are some things by way of food for thought. And yeah, thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Cesar, for joining us. And the next portion of our time together will be to have commissioner questions, and then we're going to be moving into reviewing some example approaches, after which we'll also have some discussion time. So we're going to keep this question and answer period to about 10 minutes so that we have time to keep moving along. And Cesar, I think you could stay for this in case anybody has a question for you. And so if you have a question, oh, go ahead, Paige, you're gonna.
Right, I was gonna ask if commissioners could raise their hands, but I know there were a few questions in the chat, so I'm just gonna call on commissioners and you can read them out loud. So Andrea, alternate Commissioner Andrea, do you wanna start?
Yeah, so the first one was around if there was any data on which police complaints have been deemed as wrongdoings, or how many of them, both the ones that were initiated by citizens and the ones that were internally initiated. Some data around that would be helpful. And then I had a question for Chet. So obviously most folks who express fear around defunding the police are speaking from experiences living in areas that are most likely not over-policed. So what would you say to these people on the misconception that defunding the police leads to less safer communities?
Should I go ahead and share? Or?
Sure.
Okay, so listen, number one, we have to think about there's this idea of the thin blue line. It grew in popularity in reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement. And the roots of it is actually in William Parker's work. Police chief, LAPD police chief, inherited LAPD after a series of scandals, wanted to legitimate LAPD and policing. So he started to generate this idea of the thin blue line. It already existed, but he grew it. He grew a public information division, deliberately positioned himself in front of the culture industries with a show called The Thin Blue Line, and consulted with Dragnet. And it created this idea that of the thin blue line, this idea that there's a civilized normative community of people and a chaotic non-normative set of people that are threatening them, which becomes a dog whistle for certain communities. And you can look at the history of William Parker and things that he said about particularly Black and Mexicans that lived in Los Angeles. And the idea is that without police performing the duty of detecting and separating out, quote unquote, the criminals, they would be overrun by them, right? And then this is reproduced by a lot of media, from news media, people who consume nightly news media. The nightly news media overrepresents violent crime, particularly by people of color, proportionate to actual rates of crime. So if you watch, and it's been shown that people who consume nightly news have out of proportion fears of crime that are out of proportion to the actual rates, and they're more likely to support punitive strategies, right? So there's this notion out there, but if you look into the reality, there's low clearance rates. 50 of all we know by household surveys of victimization, of the crime that people survive, of the harm that people survive, less than half is reported to law enforcement. And of that harm, of those incidents of harm, less than half of those cases are cleared by law enforcement. And so, for example, murder is the highest clearance rate. And that's at 60%, meaning across the country, 4 out of 10 murders do not lead to an arrest or what's called an exception, right? So it's, people think that if we defund the police, who am I going to call when there's a home invasion? Well, the police aren't able to react in time to stop that home invasion. They're not going to be, if you call them, they won't be able to, just logistically, I don't think it'd be possible for them to come in time to prevent it. I'm sure they would want to. It's not for lack of want or desire. Of course, they don't want that to happen. But it's just not likely that they're going to be able to intervene. That would require a level of proactive policing that I think would impinge on civil liberties. And also, as I was saying, of the crimes that are reported, not all of them get investigated. The highest is, or cleared, the highest is murder. And that varies by city and by race. And if you look at, we have this idea that police work is like.
Cesar, actually, can I just interrupt this a moment? I do want to get a couple other questions.
Sure.
So maybe just finish that idea so I can get a couple more questions. Is there any last concept there? Right.
The majority of policing is responding to non-criminal calls. You look at the New York Times, they found only about 5% of law enforcement if you average it out over a shift, only about less than 5% of a day is dedicated towards violent crime. The majority is traffic stops and non-criminal calls. So that's why the majority of police work is largely not responding to things like violent crime. And in fact, you can produce a safer community by providing more resources, and I can share a study on that.
Thank you.
So questions
Paige is up next.
Liliana and then Kayla, and those are the only folks that have their hands raised. So I think we'll just pause after them.
I just had some questions about the data of like the racial breakdown and the complaints. First of all, I wanted to know if it was all self-reported by the police. And then second of all, I wanted to clarify what the process is when you are trying to submit a complaint of brutality. I noticed that the numbers are suspiciously low. I think that, I don't know what the process is, but I would imagine that if you experienced police brutality and you had to go to the station to report it, I mean, like, why would you do that? Why would you go to the belly of the beast right after you had experienced that like harm and trauma? And also I wanted to bring up that the city had previously had a lawsuit in which the police department and our chief of police illegally retaliated against somebody who wanted to report their experience with brutality. So I just want to know, like, has anything changed since then? Is there any way to like report brutality that doesn't mean you just go back and tell it to the person who hurt you?
So I can, I'm taking down all these questions. I don't know if we want to address them now or in the future.
I'd be happy to do it now.
Okay.
So first of all, if anybody wants to make a complaint, there's several ways they can do it. They can do it over the phone. They could do it via email. They can do it in person if they choose. We often send one to their house. There's whatever option they want to make a complaint if they are concerned, as you spoke, that we make it as easy as we can for them to do so. Second, suspiciously low is an interesting word. I'll use accurately low because that's what they are. What you saw there is what they are. Like the numbers showed, almost double, we have no problem policing ourselves when someone is doing something they're not supposed to do. If they're violating somebody's rights, if they're treating somebody rude, and we see it, I don't need a citizen's complaint. I deal with that. We deal with that. And the complaints that you saw are the complaints that we've received in the last 5 years. Someone had asked earlier in the chat, and I'll be happy by the next meeting to get a breakdown of what the results were of those particular investigations. So that was an answer to someone's question earlier. And then finally, the case that you're speaking of, I'm guessing that I think is Quadra. Let's not let the facts get in the way of the story. Because if we're going to talk and we're going to make assumptions and we're going to make accusations, make sure you have your facts. Because what you accused us of and what you accused me of is simply not true. So when we're ready to discuss the facts, you have my phone number, you have my email, you know where I work, please come and let's sit and discuss the facts.
Okay, next question, Commissioner Kayla.
Yeah, I was actually going to make a similar comment to Liliana on the complaints data. I don't question that the data is accurate. I just am not sure if it's fully representative. Speaking from personal experience, I have had interactions with police officers that I should have reported, but I didn't report them because of that fear of retaliation and skepticism that, you know, having the person that I'm accusing investigate themselves in a way wouldn't be fruitful. So my question is if we have any examples of alternatives to submitting complaints to the police department, like an independent body, and if those have been more successful in really hearing the voice of the community.
Okay, so we can check into that and see if there are other opportunities.
Thanks.
Do we have time for one last question if there is one?
No one else has their hand raised, so I think we're okay.
Okay.
Right.
So Paige.
Yes. Great. So this is the format that we introduced last meeting for health and social services. It'll be the format that we follow for the next few meetings as well, that basically we know that there's lots of opportunities to potentially address racial inequities and structural and institutional racism in each of the topic areas. And we want to make sure that we are identifying approaches that make sense for South City, that will be meaningful, and that really address the specificity of South City and the county and partners. And so in thinking through these approaches, we want to make sure also that we are thinking about reducing racial disparities and disproportionalities in policing and increasing community safety. So again, thinking through and of where people of color, especially Black and Latinx folks, are engaging with the criminal justice system, are being arrested or ticketed or stopped more than would be expected based on the proportion of their how many people are in the population, and certainly compared to other people in other racial ethnic groups. And then for the longer term results, we want to support approaches that really strengthen overall community safety and relationships, ultimately decreasing the issues in which people call for police response. So preventing crime, preventing violence, really trying to get at those root causes. So we had sent these 6 example approaches out last week for review. As again before, and as we'll see in the future, we've indicated kind of what the levers of change are. So programs, practices, or policies, or multiple ones that could be implemented. And then if they would achieve the shorter term impact or longer term impact that I just went over. And we'll be leaving these up for the discussion. So I think that that's actually enough for now.
Great. So I think, now we wanted to open it up to commissioners to hear what you had to say about these example approaches. I did want to just mention a few things about these approaches that we've identified. Again, just mentioning that based on CESAR's presentation and also best practices, example approach number 1, expand community-based public safety approaches, really, reflects some of the priorities identified by Change SSF and through best practices. And also I wanted to highlight that the example approach number 3, strengthening community cohesion, is another approach that CESAR highlighted, as well as a lot of best practices data talk about that. We also saw in the Change SSF platform, analyze, so this is number 4, analyze and publicly present selected SSF police department data. That is what we presented today, but also represents what Change SSF is interested in doing. And then also establishing a community safety advisory board. This idea was also kind of originated through best practices, but also some of what Change SSF is interested in doing. And then finally, expanding implicit bias training is something that a lot of literature shows is important to work on as well. So I would just say that, these approaches are aiming at multiple levels to address racial inequities. And again, that's kind of what's driving us right now, is to hone in on specifically what we can do to focus on South San Francisco in particular. So a couple hands. I think we have, Paige, can you see the hands? I think you can see them.
Right now it's just Commissioner Andrea.
Okay.
And then, Commissioner Mike.
Okay. Commissioner Andrea,
no,
go ahead.
Mine is actually not in regards to this. I think I just wanted to call in a constructive criticism point, I think, for the entire group, is that if this is, we're looking to have, some collaborative discussions, I think it's important that all of us, from commissioners to public elected officials and everyone representing the community, that we're really stressing respect towards one another. And I think when someone's sharing something out, that it becomes more of a discussion and not a call in and call out. So just really wanted to call that in and ensure that we're keeping that same kind of establishing points that we discussed at the beginning of this commission, to ensure that no one's kind of seeing backlash to their comments. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Mike.
Yes, thanks. I want to thank Cesar for that presentation. You know, when I go online on social media, which I should not do, and look at what is posted, I come away thinking we will never find common ground because some of the stuff on social media is so vile and frankly misleading. But when I hear a presentation like I did today, which was, I think, based in fact, based in best practices, I think we do have a lot of common ground. And I think that we are going to agree on more things at a high level than perhaps some might think. Now, when we get down to the details, it will get more difficult, but I don't think we'll lose that higher purpose of what we're trying to achieve. A lot of what was discussed, I can see the vision. It gets difficult on, well, how do we pay for that? How do we actually put that in place so that it's effective and monitored and properly staffed and financed so it is effective? And that gets to be more difficult. So just a general comment that after that presentation, I'm a little more optimistic that we can come together with some common ground. I'm sure there will be some things we disagree on. I'm not being Pollyannish. But for example, I look at the list that you're providing right now, and I think it's a good start. And I do have hope that we will come to meaningful change as a team. So just wanted to make that comment. Thank you for that presentation, Cesar.
Commissioner Liliana and Commissioner Edith both have their hands up, but I'd like to actually, Commissioner Cheska, you had a few comments in the chat. I'd invite you to share aloud. Commissioner Cheska?
Hi, yes. So I was just bouncing off of what Chess presentation. I was out for a little bit and I just came back, so I just thought I should just throw it in there. And I would also just like to thank Chef for the presentation. And I just echoed what basically was said with what he included. Did you want me to read?
Yeah, no, it just looked like, you don't have to read it, but it looked like you had
Okay.
some comments about the actual example approaches or some thoughts. So I just invite you to share them.
I have nothing at the moment. I just thought that I should echo what was already said by Che.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I really want to hear what people have to say about the example approaches since they're here, and we're hoping to hear specifically what commissioners think about that. Think about those, and maybe thinking of having people who haven't spoken yet go first, and then we can come back to those who have. Does that seem okay?
So now we're getting more
Commissioner
hands.
Edith and
yeah,
great. Commissioner Edith and Commissioner Hermes, and then Commissioner Bobby, and then we'll come back to you, Liliana.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. First of all, I just really want to say that I appreciate Cesar Rodriguez's presentation. Like, I want to second Commissioner Mike Futrell, because it also feels that the opportunities and the different, I hope that this is not just a presentation. I think that we really, just like Commissioner Mike said, we take this deep into thinking, what else can we do? What is it that been done in other places? What is it that is working in other places that we can do in South San Francisco? I personally know that there are times when funding gets in the way of trying to support the community, but as a individual who has been able to be part of two groups who were, in reality, we don't need any money to really get together and support each other and listen to what the needs are and connect them with resources, is something that we can do. And I think a lot of the programs that Cesar Rodriguez exposed, I think we should look into them, because one time in the city council, we mentioned that the population of families who have kids with special needs needed a place to meet. And I was handed out a business card from Commissioner Mike. He gave us the card. And now this group, Familias Fuertes, is meeting in South San Francisco at the Community Learning Center. So those are opportunities that can happen. And I just wanted to comment and again say that hopefully we take this into really more hopefully in a reality in South San Francisco. Not necessarily always we need the funding to start something that is going to support the community in South San Francisco.
Thank you. Commissioner Hermes?
Yes, good evening, everybody. I'm pretty happy what I heard from Cesar and the commissioners. I personally had not a good experience, maybe like 5-6 years ago with a couple of police officers. And after that, I had the opportunity to participate on the Hispanic Police Academy. And that will change my perspective for the police and what they do, and my respect to the department group. But a year after that, an event on my neighborhood questioned that respect, because I asked on a couple of meetings ago, what is the procedure to approach a teenager, for example? And I had to witness on my blog a couple of years ago that a 14-year-old kid doing some wheelie, on his bike, was approached in a manner that it could be affect in the future. The way he was treated when that 14-year-old kid becomes 20 probably will not appreciate the police department the way he was treated. What are the levels of approach? If somebody is a teenager and just playing around, instead of going full force, ask what they're doing, try to coach them, like a lot of parents will do with their kids, right? And I would like to see more of those. We're here to find common ground. I'm not trying to point fingers. But that would be a good example that I witnessed, that from a bad experience, you can develop a respect to our different departments. But at the same time, it could, a small amount of officers, it could change everything. And that brings another one that I want to conclude, that by engaging us, when we participate in the Hispanic Police Academy, it really engages a lot of the people that were there. And it was surprisingly, there was only capacity for 25, and we were like 32, and retired police person that was conducting the training, well, they have more room. And that was very exciting to see that community really want, we need a place also to do it. So hopefully we can see more of those youth programs, children and adult programs where we can engage between the police department and the community. And it's, when we see in the street, not be afraid of them. We might wave instead. And if we do something that is out of the line, we can always, we have an answer, right? We might be going through some difficult times in our lives. So if somebody comes to me and attack me, my brain blocks. It just cannot operate. And so by knowing each other, maybe on a police academy or any program for our kids, when they become adult, we'll respect these entities more. So hopefully we can have a community center. It's pretty hard for the Old Town residents to go out of the way. Yes, the Hispanic community was done at the Learning Center, but it would be great if we can have something on our main corridor where we can have all these programs and engage more the community, and actually don't be afraid of our officers, and they will feel comfortable with us too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Hermes. It sounds like you're talking about the example approach number 3, and also perhaps some aspect of number 1 as well. Commissioner Bobby, I think you're next.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So I had a question. Hopefully the professor is still with us, but I'm trying to understand approach number 3. There seems to be a little bit of a disconnect perhaps between sort of two models. One is kind of a community policing, you know, police part of the community, integrated into the community, from the community, you know, sort of almost a high touch model of policing, in sort of police with collaborating with the community. And then the professor talked about one of the best practices being reducing contact between the police and the public. And you know, each of those models seems to have a lot of logic to them. I mean, when I see a car pulled over because it has there's a flat tire, and then I see 3 police cars there, it seems like probably not necessarily necessary to have 3, you know, firearms in that situation. So I'm just wondering, are those 2 ideas in conflict? Reducing contact between the police and the public as a best practice, and perhaps approach number 3, which seems to be suggesting more of a high touch, you know, relationship with the community. So some discussion of that I'd appreciate now or later. And then the second point or question I had was, is there any for SFPD? SSFPD. I'm wondering about hiring strategies, hiring practices, recruitment practices in terms of the balance of you know, communities of color and white officers and other folks working in the department. So I was wondering a little bit about that. And also I resonate, I think, with number 5. If that's a Community Safety Advisory Board reviewing data, if that is also along the lines of a civilian review board, if is that what's kind of envisioned in number 5? Because that would address some of the concerns about you know, complaints not having to go to the department, but to a community board, which community members might be, you know, more willing to discuss more candidly any complaints with a civilian board that's not the department itself. So those are my thoughts at the time.
And if I could just, if it's okay to jump in with a quick clarification, thank you for that, Commissioner Bobby. At least our thought, and clearly the approaches can and will evolve, and we'll see what makes sense for SSF, but at least the intention behind 1 and 3 were not the assumption that the police be involved. They might be involved. There's lots of ways they could be involved in implementation, and there's also lots of ways they could be implemented without police involvement. So I think that okay. Yeah, but that's all.
Not predetermined. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I see a number of hands. I might go to a couple folks that I haven't heard from yet. So Commissioner Pat, is it okay if I have you jump in?
Hi. Okay, so I didn't know that number 3 was without the police officers. I have to say, you know, police officers are part of our community. And I think that I know from having my kids go through the schools in our district that we have many parents that work for the police department and that are police officers. We have one of our teachers is married to a police officer. So they live in and they're part of our community. And my feeling is always that the more you get to know a person on a personal level, the better it is. So strengthening communities, community cohesion, I think that's great. But I also think that having the police officers there is not a bad thing. And in terms of number 6, expanding implicit bias training for SSF
SSFPD. I think implicit bias training for anybody is a good idea. And I think that we all have our biases and we all should be, you know, as best we can. I think that training is good for everyone. Other than that, I think, and again, I thought number one included the police, but I think having conflict resolution, restorative justice, maybe that can be done with the community, a community board, community safety advisory board or community board. But restorative justice practices are always, you know, the best in conflict resolution. Those are always the best approaches, I think. At any rate, those are my ideas.
Thank you. We have about 10 more minutes, so I think we can hear from everybody here. Commissioner Vanessa, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to say, number 3, I think strengthening community engagement and cohesion is really important. People are more willing to speak out and stand up for others and themselves when they feel like they're part of a bigger whole. So getting people involved and knowing their neighbors and knowing their community is really important. And a diverse community involvement is really what we need to strengthen programs like safety advisory boards and connecting people to services via word of mouth. So I think anything we can do to strengthen the community within itself is really important for everything else that we choose to do. And then also briefly, I just wanted to say number 5, establishing a community safety advisory board or any advisory board that we do or that we suggest. I hope that we can come up with some way that it's going to have teeth and it's going to be able to make sure that its recommendations are taken seriously and push forward for next steps and follow through and not just recommendations, which we've all kind of said our first day. That's kind of what we hope that this commission will have, is some sort of teeth where we can actually make change. But I think both of those are very good ideas.
Thank you. Should we go to Commissioner Liliana?
Sorry, actually Gladys first, and then.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Hi. So my comment is, I actually see that it's probably an evolution of some of these strategies. I do believe that you want to start with the strengthening community as one of them. I think that a lot of the comments that I hear of this right now, there is a lot of distrust, and you have to really build that distrust. And I believe that probably one of the ways to do that is really starting with strengthening community and see how to start trying to bridge. So I don't know if at the end of this process, some of these can be combined. I can see the importance of using data to actually make recommendations. So for example, between 4 and 5, eventually working together to using data to have that advisory board has kind of the backing of the data to be able to make recommendations. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think now Commissioner Liliana.
Hi, so I would just like to say that I think we should prioritize one, separate from policing, like how Chase said in his presentation. The best way to prevent violence is just to prevent contact between police and the community. So you brought up earlier what we talked about with the mental health and social service program being within the police department. I think that any of these programs that we create need to be completely separate because of the fact that Chase said is a conflict of interest. If you're like, you know, doing drugs or involved in something like that, like why would you go to the police? It just doesn't make any sense. And then second of all, I definitely want to prioritize the advisory board. And I think that they should have firing power because I think the community needs to be able to have a say in like who is policing us. I don't think it's enough that we just provide recommendations because I think that they're just going to fall on deaf ears. And I would also like to, I don't think that we should pursue 6 because the data shows that implicit bias training doesn't make any difference in like outcomes and violence. And I think that like, I appreciate the comments of people who've had positive experiences, but like, we also have to remember that this is about race, and policing is like a fundamentally racist institution. So if you're white, of course, you're gonna have a better experience with the police than somebody who is not white. And then also I would like to, again, just emphasize that we need to have like a misconduct process that is separate, like through the civilian board, maybe. Yeah, I just don't think like, I mean, we all saw it, like the chief's reaction was extremely hostile to me. I don't really appreciate being told that I'm not credible or like I'm making something up when I just found public information that's on the internet. So if you're gonna have that reaction like over Zoom, why would somebody feel comfortable going to the police station? It just doesn't make sense to me. That was it.
So I think in terms of just clarifying information, if there is a specific question that anyone has that we can get more information about and bring it back to be really explicit, I just want to address that we are trying to keep all of the information that we present here as direct and accurate as possible. So Liliana, if there is a specific question that you have, I think what I'd like to offer is we'll look into it and bring it back here. You know, what we're really trying to do is to present the data that we have to be able to make good decisions. And so, you know, really want to just say that that's our intent here. So thank you for your comments. Let's see, Commissioner Kayla, who's next?
Yeah. I also like number 5. You know, I think implicit bias training is okay. The data will be useful, but if we don't have accountability, you know, that sort of happens in a vacuum. And it's also a really nice structure to continue this work and, you know, to make sure like the other initiatives are happening in a way that resonates with the community. I also really like number 2. No one has talked about that one yet. I think you showed data that said like a lot of the police calls are for these like misdemeanor offenses. And if there's a way that we can kind of reduce escalation for those offenses, I think there were like 60% from the bar chart of the calls. So that's a big chunk of the work that the department is doing.
Thank you. So we have about, I think like 5 to 7 minutes. Is that right, Paige?
I think about 10
for
minutes.
A few more questions, maybe
right,
10?
So
okay.
We have,
I definitely want to get
right,
hands.
there are commissioners, Jeff, Mike, Bobby, and then Mark. So I wonder if we want to start with Commissioner Mark, because we haven't heard from him yet tonight.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone's comments. I like all of these approaches. I think it's important that we have to have buy-in from the community. Unless we have trust and partnership from them, I don't know if anything is going to get accomplished, because if we don't have trust and partnerships, we can make all these recommendations, but if no one's trusting us or is buying into what we're doing, it's not going to go anywhere. I also think it's important to see the data, because it's important for us to kind of recognize the data and work off that, to see what's happening in terms of our community, to ask the tough questions of why that's happening, and then finding out kind of the reasoning for that. You know, in terms of what we're seeing, and why is there a high number of, let's say, Latinx and Black individuals getting pulled over according to the data? I mean, we have to ask those questions, you know, and that's important to know. I found it interesting also that the information said the majority are from individuals who aren't South City residents. And so I love reading data. I think it's important to understand data, and so that we can really dig into the numbers and try to find solutions to that. So, but I am enjoying the ideas that people are spreading around here and how we can try to move forward. And I hope that we can continue to do that. So thank you.
And then Chair Nicholas, before we go back to folks that have spoken before.
You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So like Mark, I really think that it's important for us to establish trust. You know, we have talked about this. We would like to also start with the homeowners association so that everyone could know each other in the community. And that has always been encouraged. Like, for example, the Westminster Manor group. There's a lot of home organizations, that homeowner association that we support. We would like to have that so that everybody can be engaged in the community. We have always asked for people to join the community CERT, the Community Emergency Response Team. That is something that how to get to know people. Like I said, when I came here 32 years ago, it was very difficult for us because we don't know anybody. But the first thing we did was to volunteer. And that's when you gain trust from everybody. You know them and you find out that you're all human beings. It's not difficult to understand how I feel and how they feel, although they don't look like me. So it's very important for me, I think, that we should also consider 3. I'm a little surprised that Liliana has data about implicit bias training, because all companies, especially, you know, I work now for Gilead, they spend so much money in implicit bias training. So are we just wasting money in that? When I attend those training, I really find out things that I didn't know about. So I think I watch what I do, and I hopefully that helps out in dealing with people. And, you know, for a council member, I know Mark does know this. We see the watch log every day. So we know exactly what's going on in the city. And so for people to think that there are not crimes that's happening in here, and these people who are coming to our city, I don't think there's anything that we can do. You cannot prevent anybody from coming here. But I think we just all too have to be watchful. And that's how, you know, your community can help out. So for me, I think I would support number 3 and number 5. Thank you.
Paige, is Commissioner Mike up next?
Yes, I believe. And I think maybe if we can, since we should move on in a moment, I think if we could try to keep Commissioner Jeff, Commissioner Mike, and Commissioner Bobby, if you each have a minute.
I'll be very brief. I just
Cool.
wanted to comment. There was a question asked about if we're going to use mental health professionals, why are they embedded with the police department? The current thinking as we're working with the county, and this really has legs, I think we're going to be able to pilot this program and try it out, is that when you get a 911 call, the professional would be there with the police or somehow interacting with that 911 call. That is the primary reason we are pursuing this. If they have downtime, which they like, this mental health professional likely would, we'd like them to also work with our homeless population, work with those in the city that we know have mental health issues and perhaps provide some support. But the primary focus right now is when there's a 911 call to the police department and it appears it has some mental health component, that individual will be available to respond. And, you know, if you get there and the person has a gun, well, then the police is probably going to take the lead. But if not, then the police will hang back and let the mental health professional do their thing. So that just, as this is evolving, that's the current thinking, that how can you separate them from the police department if in fact they are there to respond to the 911 calls that are mental health related that come into the police department. I'm not sure we can separate those two, but I understand where people are coming from in separating police. but this is evolving. I'm really hopeful we might be able to actually start this before the end of the year, but I'll keep the commission up to date.
Okay, so are we Commissioner Bobby and Commissioner Jeff? Are you next?
Yeah, I can be very, very brief. Just to the data, I think our work, as we've said from the beginning, needs to be data driven. So number 4 is particularly important. Some of the data that was presented today on the police stops, et cetera, and arrests, it was difficult to understand because there was no context. So where do we rank in relation to similarly situated cities? That kind of information, I didn't know what to do with that. The numbers seem low, but I don't know what to compare them to. Secondly, the professor in his presentation had various links to other organizations and projects. I wasn't able to access those links on the PowerPoint, so if somehow we can get those available to the commissioners, that would be wonderful. And then also, so data is terribly important, and whether that's statistical data, survey data, or the data from people, right? So the ethnographic data, and so to have public comment coming sort of at the end of this meeting is a little unfortunate because for me to think about how to prioritize these, that prioritization in my mind, will be influenced by what I hear in the public comment. So I am still, I have an idea of what, my priority list would be, but I think once I listen to public comment, I'll be even more, that's more data that I can use to think about prioritizing needs. And then finally, I think the data about implicit bias training, I don't know that we know enough to know whether or not we should be doing it. I mean, I think unless we learn that indeed, it's not helpful, I think we should go forward with that as one of our priorities, because the data that I'm aware of does show that it is helpful. So, I think I don't want to throw that out just yet, unless we do discover that it wouldn't be a good use of resources.
Let me just thank you for those points, Commissioner Bobby. Just to clarify, we're not making any final decisions today. I just want to mention that again. And I really appreciate what you're saying in terms of wanting to hear public comment. And so, what's next is the question really just about, do we want to find out more about any of these sooner as opposed to later? But it doesn't mean that we're taking anything off necessarily, because we're going to come back to the list that we generate in each of the meetings and look at those all together later down the line. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I appreciate, wanting to hear a range of perspectives. Okay, so Commissioner Jeff.
I just wanted to speak about something that Commissioner Bobby brought up earlier that also has me a little bit perplexed. Just, for 28 years, it's been about building a relationship with the community and being more involved in the community. And hearing what Caesar had to say, and I've heard and read from others as well, that now the request is that stops, or that isn't not helpful. And I just think at some point, if we can have more of a conversation about that, because I would like to figure out, what is the best way. We get phone calls from neighborhood watch groups and they want us involved. We're always going to go if we get asked, but I don't want to put officers into groups that don't want them there either. So I think we just need to kind of figure that out, and it would be nice to read more on that and learn a little bit more and try to figure out the best way to build and establish those relationships.
Okay. So I think we're at the time of the agenda, right, Paige? Just check me if that's
correct.
That's right. Okay. So this is really the question that the same question as we raised last time. We don't have to prioritize. Sorry, I keep using that word incorrectly. I'm going to take that back. We are looking at if anyone is interested in proposing to further investigate during phase 1, any of the approaches that we've just talked about. So we don't need to do that, but we were also trying to balance this idea of getting more information if people want to move that forward with more information sooner as opposed to later. So I will open it up to commissioners to identify an approach that they want more information on sooner as opposed to later.
It sounded like the most, at least for people who spoke, that the most interest so far was around, and most kind of consistent support was around examples 3 and 5, but we can certainly consider others as well. And I will go back in case that's helpful.
So I see your hand, Commissioner Liliana. Do we want to do a quick straw poll? Kind of participants raising hands?
Commissioner Caleb, no, we're not voting yet. We're trying to figure out if there are any. It sounds like there's at least 2 that we will see if there's more than half of the commissioners want to immediately start investigating as opposed to waiting until the end of phase 1 to decide if it's prioritized, because it's not prioritized yet. We could vote on more than the 2 that there seem to be interest around. If that's the case, we would only kind of start investigating the 2 with the most votes.
Yeah, that's right. So we've heard again,
so sorry, you started to invite Commissioner Liliana to speak, and I wanted to just clarify the process, so apologies.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I know I've been raising my hand a lot, but because of the limited representation we have, I'm just trying to speak for as many people as possible in a short amount of time. So I think I would like to emphasize approach number 1, especially the part about what Che was saying, those alternatives for the gang task force and the alternatives that we see in schools. I think there's a lot of examples in other cities like LA where they've had a lot of success bringing in like people who can interrupt violence within their own community, who are like credible to the community. That way we don't have to like spend a lot of time trying to like legitimize an other group of people when like we have people in the community that are trusted. So I think we should be prioritizing that, not just on like the streets, but also in the schools. I would like to see more of that.
okay, so we have an idea for one. What I'm thinking, Commissioner Pat?
Yeah, hi. At this time, the school district is looking at policing in our schools, or police liaison officers in our schools. Right now, the superintendent has been tasked to get data for us so that we can study the data. It's not something that this panel can, this is not something this panel you can address it, but we're in the process of looking at what it looks like in our school district. And so that process has already been started on the school district side where policies are made.
Yeah, and I think just to comment on that quickly, I think we're going to look into the education and school district data next in our next meeting, so we can come back to that. Commissioner Norm?
Yes, just one comment. I've heard a lot. The reason I didn't comment earlier, I'm in agreement with a lot of things said. We've had a lot of different topics. But the one comment I'd be curious about, we mentioned what we have like with safety committees, advisory boards, whatever word we wish to put on it. I'd be curious what other cities are doing and using, because many departments, whether it be police, fire, public works, they have bargaining units. and they're talking about having effectiveness and what can be done from a community to deal with bargaining units to have effectiveness and be able to give their comments. So I'd be curious what other communities are doing, you know, our neighbors, if they do have communities or committees, excuse me, like that. That's all I have.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm glad you said that, because really, you know, again, we're not voting and we're not making any final decisions, but we are just wondering if there's anything you want to get more information on sooner as opposed to later. So it sounds like we've heard most about approach number 1. We heard a number of comments from the commissioners about approach number 3, and then also approach number 5. Should we go ahead? Is there any other approach that folks want to nominate to consider, and then we'll vote on that shorter list just to see if we want to bring it forward sooner as opposed to later? Anything else? Yeah, Commissioner Gladys.
So I think it's going to be difficult without including data. I mean, I appreciate the data that is already being shared, but I think that it's going to be very difficult without the data. So I will advocate for number 4 to be included. Since I know that you wanted to reduce to those only 2, but I think it will be very important to include that one. Thank you.
Okay. So let's just take a look at, I think I'm going to go ahead. I have, I think, 8 more minutes before we go to public comment. Commissioner Mark, did you want to make a quick comment before we?
I just wanted to echo what Commissioner Bobby and mentioned in terms of data. I'm data driven too, so I wanted to echo number 4. I mean, there's data there already that we have, and we should really take a look at that and see how we can work from that data and see how we can improve and ask really the tough questions. I mean, I think we're all data driven, and I think we all have ideas of what we want to do, but if we don't have the data in front of us, it's going to be really hard to kind of back up what we're trying to accomplish. So I'm kind of in support of number 4.
Yeah, and I think for any of these, just to clarify again, we will be looking into the data that we can find. And I think, you know, you as commissioners and community members, we're very interested in what you're looking at as data. So please let us know. We can review that and share it as well. So I think we have 4 approaches that we're thinking about. So let's do one at a time, and we'll do a quick straw poll. So again, this is just which ones do we want to get more information about sooner as opposed to later? And then at the end, we'll make some harder decisions.
And so we'll go with the 2 that have the most votes of support right now. So we want you to begin with doing approach number 1. If you think that we should move forward with right now in looking into further only, please raise your hand, and then we'll give it a little bit, and then we'll lower everyone's hand and go to the next approach and do the same.
Okay, so what's up right now is, folks, you're going to have an opportunity to vote for 2 of these to advance and get more information sooner as opposed to later. So Paige, are you tracking the numbers of commissioner votes?
Yes, I am. Just pulling the screen.
I'm sorry, point of clarification. So we can only pick 2 of the 4. So we can't vote for all 4, basically. Okay.
If that makes sense, that'll help us narrow more easily.
Yeah, we're just trying to keep it manageable.
So if you change your mind with that information, you can click on lower hand. So we'll give you 10 more seconds. And
looks like 14.
In the interest of time, I'm going to take screenshots and we will be taking notes, but I'm not going to take the time right now to count. So we'll come back to this in a moment. Okay.
So now we're going to look at advancing approach
3.
number 3. Thank you, Paige, for the real-time updates. So approach number 3, gathering more information and looking at other examples.
Just to clarify, is this, did we say that this is like more police outreach, basically?
To be determined. Our assumption going into it was not that it involved the police, but that is to be determined.
So it looks like 10, okay. Anybody else on number 3?
2 of those I think are from attendees. So is it just commissioners voting?
It's just commissioners. Thank you for that question. Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so then it should be 6, I think.
Yes, I believe that's correct. Okay. I'm just going to grab this and screenshot. Sorry, one moment. And okay, and then next is approach number 4, data.
Okay, so approach number 4, looking at that.
Okay, last few seconds. Okay, great. Okay, and then approach number 5.
So this is the approach focusing on establishing a community safety advisory board to review data and provide recommendations.
Okay, last few seconds.
And commissioners, it looks like 11, is that right?
I have 9.
Oh, I wasn't counting commissioners per se, I just was noticing.
Oh, gotcha.
You probably
I just want to clarify
Yeah,
again, if you voted for 2 already, I can't vote on a 3rd, correct?
Correct.
Okay, because I like all of them.
We will be
Again, we're not
revisiting all of
eliminating any
them.
right now. I'm glad that that's the problem that we have right now.
Yeah. And I don't want to eliminate any of them, actually, so I'm glad.
We're not.
That's right. Not quite there yet. That's right.
Great. Okay. Great. Certainly 5 is one of the 2. I think that the other one is 1, but I will need to look at the numbers again more closely instead of moving so quickly. So, okay.
I had 14 votes, but I don't know if they were all commissioners.
Yeah, I can help on that. This is Lisa Costa Sanders. I found 11 commissioners voted in favor of approach 1, 6 commissioners voted in favor of approach 3, 5 commissioners in favor of approach 4, and 9 commissioners voted in favor of approach 5. So the top 2 vote getters was approach number 1 and approach number 5.
Great. Thank you, Lisa.
And that's
Perfect.
commissioners only.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Takes a village.
Okay.
Okay. So now the portion we want to make sure to have enough time to listen to community members and public comment. And we have kind of, similar to the way that we've approached this in past meetings. We're asking you to limit your time to 2 minutes and raise your hand virtually. And if you're on the phone, we can also have you join us. And
if you, I just opened the chat for the public. So while we do want you to actually make public comment rather than using the chat, if you're having any technical difficulties, please use the chat and we will try to unmute you or figure out any issues.
Okay, so it looks like Victoria. Are you going to go ahead and do that, Paige?
Yes, hold on one moment. Yes, and just finally, I know that there's a number of people who called in, so if you want to raise your hand to speak, please dial *9 and it'll raise the hand, and then we'll call on the last few digits of your phone number. But we'll start with Victoria, followed by Eddie Holman. So Victoria.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Hi. I just want to say thank you all for, having all this information for the community. I'm very grateful for both sides and hearing what you all have to say, but I strongly agree with Commissioner Mark Nogales how important it is for data, but for it to be accessible for everyone. I would like to know, like, when is this data taken, who took the data, because I feel like that can also affect, the objectivity and how it affects us right now. Is it something from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or is it like just like everything that is relevant to the community from like 10 years to now? I also just want to say that I have great respect for the police, but I do understand that there are issues within it, and I think it was a great point to have that we all do have biases, and I see that there are two different opinions of whether or not bias training works. I don't know, because I'm a little confused as to the data itself, if it does work. I've seen it myself that for work, when people take it, they start approaching situations maybe in a different way, but I don't know if that's universal. So I think that is an important thing to have, if you could possibly bring that data and make it public for everyone. Let's see, there was so much said, and it's hard to really have the ability to say everything in this amount of time, but I just want to say thank you all, and that's what I would like to know and have it accessible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Eddie, I'll invite you to.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Well, first off, I want to say thank you to Professor Cesar. I think that was a great presentation. Definitely give us some alternatives to policing in our community. And first I want to talk about is my main concern is with the lack of accountability with South San Francisco police. And that's in relation to okay, there was a little bit of feedback, but I wanted to talk about kind of the oversight board that was discussed. Many cities have civilian oversight boards, and South San Francisco does not, and it holds the police accountable. All the data that South San Francisco police showed us is from the police themselves, which presents a conflict of interest. What incentive do police have to produce data that would put them in a negative light? Furthermore, I don't really trust the city council right now is our only way we can perform oversight over the police. And they already have access to the data, and they said that they don't support any defunding of the police or any look at shifting resources from the police. Councilman Nogales, I don't know the process, but Councilman Nogales was talking about he wants to see the data. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, you are a city council member. Do you not already have access to the data? So another thing I want to talk about is the civilian complaints. We're 29 in relation to the 54 by the department. This begs the question, what's going on that we're not hearing about? And then also I wanted to talk about the exchange earlier when Commissioner Rivera asked about police misconduct. As a chief as a party, response was unprofessional and rude. And also it was just simply to make the point that when then Captain as a party retaliated against Quadra, who filed a police misconduct complaint. He retaliated by referring a case to the DA, but the case was actually dropped against Quadra. So the whole point is we need a civilian oversight board to review data and to accept police complaints. And that's all the time I have.
Thank you very much.
Doug will be next, followed by Patty.
Okay, I have unmuted.
Oh dear, Doug, you muted yourself again. We'll restart the clock. Can you unmute yourself, Doug?
There you go.
Okay, so Doug is unmuted. Yeah, we can. We're going to restart the clock.
Oh, that's kind of you. I'm a lifelong resident of South San Francisco, save for 7 years when I lived elsewhere. And I would like to just start out by saying that I have seen a humongous degree of change in this community since I was a youngster. I also would like to voice my heartfelt and strong support for the South San Francisco Police Department. I, like one of the commissioners, have attended the Citizens Police Academy, and I went there because, 2020 has been, and from the early 20s, there has been such an anti-police bias in this country that I wanted to learn more about how our police department operated. I learned about the Citizens Academy, I participated, and I will say that without question, I did not hear an inappropriate word from any of the police that I interacted with. I did not see an inappropriate action from any of the police that I rode along with on the ride-ons or any of the instructors. And I further would like to say that, Liliana Rivera, anti-police bias is nonsense. Systemic racism, I challenge any of you to produce actual evidence, go through the policies and procedures of the police department and find systemic racism. I don't think you'll find it. At the very first commission, 2 questions were asked by the moderator, hopes and fears. And my hope is that this commission is not packed with anti-police members. My fear is that it is. My time is almost up. Thank you very much for listening.
So I'm just going to invite folks to be respectful. I feel like we're starting to get into name calling a little bit and calling people out who have spoken with, from their own perspectives and community perspectives. And I really want to just reestablish that we're interested in divergent perspectives. I think we're going to have hard conversations. We want to hear that, and we really want to respect diversity of perspectives here. So I'm going to continue to invite public comment and prefer not to have names related to the comments. We're talking about ideas. And I guess, one of the things I'll just say, I've been reading How to Be an Anti-Racist recently, and reminded again of the importance of focusing on systemic racism rather than on individuals. And I think that, I just want to reintroduce the idea that we're here to create meaningful change together. Okay. Who's next?
Patty, and then followed by GH.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Okay, cool. So this is Patricia Hurtado, and I'm sorry on behalf of those experiencing all this fear and hate within themselves. That's unfortunate. I personally come from an objective background. The first year and a half of my graduate level training, which has been within the last several years, so my information is current, was in a clinical forensic doctoral program. And my focus was law enforcement psychology. So I've done hours of the research in relation to officer competence and wellness. So first, instead of implicit bias, consider cultural humility and cultural competence. trainings. So those are two different areas. Humility being understanding and competence being practice. Second, I think yearly psychological assessments, no less than every other year, specific to personality and violence, just to distinguish which officers can continue to meet the demands of their profession, and to give you a general understanding of how quickly and impactful an officer's psyche can deteriorate when put in a position of authority. I think look up Zimbardo Stanford Prison Experiment is a good place to start. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Patty.
Yep.
Paige, who's up next?
GH just allowed you to unmute, and then followed by Gustavo Lopez.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I just want to thank everyone for taking this time to look into all of these issues. And I just want to...
Sorry, technical issue.
GH somehow.
Yeah, one moment, GH, come back. Sorry, I think I hit the wrong button. And...
So what we're doing now is just making sure that GH
there we go.
comes back.
Yes.
Okay, and we're going to restart. No problem. Thanks, Paige.
Hello?
Go ahead, Paige. Yeah, sorry
okay,
about that.
so I just want to remind everyone is a human being. No one is perfect. We all have biases. And if we really want to create effective, long-lasting change, everybody has to be able to also forgive one another. Okay, I'm sure the police department's work is not easy. We do not have privy to what they do. They get to see a lot of ugly things that humans do. I'm not saying they're perfect, but I have had different police interactions, and as far as my experience with the South City Police Department, it has been very positive. I have seen them very active in the community in regards to other communities. And I also do believe that we do need to make decisions based on data and not emotion. So we do need to take our emotions out of the equation and our own biases out of the equation. I would like to see more people of the community participate in these panels, because if change is made, every citizen is going to be affected. And we have to make decisions that are specific to South City. We can't allow outside information or outside things that do not apply to our own city change just to be socially relevant. We have to look at the positives as well as the negative and change the negatives. So I just urge everyone to take their own biases out of their mind. At the end of the day, we're all humans, and we also have to consider every citizen. So I hope that every citizen is also surveyed, and just to see how they feel about the situation here in South City. We can't just base it heavily on one side or one popular opinion. It has to be fair for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Gustavo, you're
Yes,
next.
hello, thank you. Hello, my name is Gustavo. I'm an instructor at San Francisco State University in the Public Health Department, where we deal with many of our classes deal with issues of systemic racism and policing in our community. And give my public comment because I feel the task force has swayed away from the realities facing our country. We're in a country that's faced with another Black man shot in the back 7 times and left paralyzed. The current state of policing is killing Black people and people of color. Surface level reform will not change or even address systemic racism. To the comment that the police can police themselves, let's take a step back and see what's going on right now. We have the largest social movement since the anti-war in Vietnam. You have US sports teams like the NBA, MLB, WNBA who have gone on strike, some in the middle of playoffs, which we've never seen before in the history of that sport. So the system does not work. Racism is about power, and the only way you address racism is by taking away power from the institutions that are plagued by systemic racism, like police departments. Police have had the ability to get away with abusing the power against marginalized communities with policies that reinforce the idea that you can shoot first and deal with it later. And by many times abusing these policies by downright not addressing checks and balances. This is why many of us are demanding an end to qualified immunity, right? Our communities are demanding that our city fully fund wraparound services, void of police presence. We're demanding police do work with our children, and we're demanding police do not work with our children and youth, as the national data has shown that the programs are failures and are too costly. We rather would like to invest in mental health services, youth case managers, counselors, after-school centers, and sports programs. And I would say, you know, it sounds scary to do these things, but Foster City, a city right next to us that's maybe more affluent than we are, has ended their contract with the police and are reinvesting that money to go to services that actually shows works. So I would urge us to please stay away from having to center the police in every single fabric of our society. We can create just programs, and there's tons of examples of programs where the police do not have to be the center or the face of the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrea Sims next, followed by Luis de Paz Fernandez.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yes.
You can.
Great. I just want to, my name is Andrea Sims. I just first off really want to thank Cesar Rodriguez for giving that really great presentation. I'd like to point out to the task force and the commission that I believe that there is a lot of data that Che has utilized for you all to look through and offer solutions and alternatives that can be definitely available for South San Francisco instead of utilizing SSFPD, as we have seen in the data that Che provided, as well as what the commission has provided as well too, that we are seeing a lot of the systemic racism happen within our community, and these alternatives will be, as we can see, other communities are starting to look into them and we're seeing success with them. I also would like to point out as well that in regards to the implicit bias, I think that's something that we really need to look into, of that we're seeing that it's not working and reducing the rates in regards to police brutality, which is why I believe, to Commissioner Lilly's point earlier, is why the commission should look into it a little bit further and find that data and look into it and not move it forward. And then also just utilizing the public servants that we already have in our community, like teachers or counselors and all of that, instead of utilizing the police, as we are not seeing that connection within our community at this moment. And, you know, if we want to build a community that is more trusting and safe for South San Francisco, we need to utilize the community members that are already in there and not the ones that are distrusted at the moment. I have no further comments at this time, but thank you all.
Thank you. Luis de Paz?
Followed by Russell Lee and then Tasso Mav.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Luis de Paz Fernandez. I've been a resident of South San Francisco for 17, 18 years now. Grew up here, you know, currently work at San Francisco State. And I just want to emphasize some of the things that I've heard from comments and also the conversation tonight, where, you know, just because you haven't experienced racism doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and their systems are in place. I myself have had positive and negative encounters with the police in South San Francisco. And I think, you know, the conversation has really deviated towards, oh, it was my experience good or bad? And it's really, I think what we're trying to do is how can we really, you know, in a way as well, you know, not put that much load in the police officers, right? And really pass those expertise towards other areas that, you know, mental health, that you have those experts in that field that can help with those situations. So I really would love for this commission and for community members who are a little skeptical about not defunding the police and how that's going to impact them. It's really we're really kind of trying to bring light into how can we take advantage of other services and other community members to really come in and play that partnership role with the police. I've seen members of the immigrant community in our communities as well, like, you know, because they're driving without a license, and that's I see the issue there, but you know, they're taking their kids to school and police officers just stopping them and making the kids walk to school by themselves, right, over a mile. And I've seen that multiple times. So it's all about also being mindful of the situation, right? Like, you're traumatizing kids because they're seeing that experience with police officers. So I definitely would want to emphasize that we need to start turning the conversation into how can we use other services that exist to take over some services that police is not meant to really oversee. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Russell.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, thank you. I just want to start off by acknowledging that, like, most of the people who've expressed like pro-police, I guess, sentiments in this lobby, can I just ask you, like, to check who your friends are, right? Like, if you don't have friends who are actively talking about their experiences with the police, if you don't have friends who have those experiences where you know it's a sensitive topic to talk about, and oh my god, okay, sorry, I'm blanking out. Sorry. It's just frustrating because I used to discount a lot of like what my friends would tell me about how like their experiences, or like how they would talk about like F the police, and I always think that that's, oh, they're just, you know, reiterating what they heard off of like, you know, music, or, you know, like Straight Outta Compton, the movie. And like it just like takes some like investigation to really see that, like, you know, their experiences were legitimate. Like I would like go to liquor stores with like my friend who happens to be half black, and like police officers would like look at him with a scowl, you know. Like, I have had like friends who would be like pulled over for no reason other than, you know, because they were black. And like, it again, it's a sensitive issue. Like, the loudest people in the room aren't always the most correct one. And when we talk about data and we talk about experiences, like, it's really hard to understand why we're exempt from so many things in our city. Like, why do we think that we're special just because you haven't experienced what other people in the community have? Like, that's like, it's not only humane, but it's inhumane, but it's just, I don't know, it just makes me sad that this is what our city is. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. I think Casso?
Yes, thank you. I'm a lifelong resident of South San Francisco, went to South City schools. My children now attend South City schools. And I just want to encourage the commission to remain objective and focused on their goals. I'm really discouraged when I hear commissioners have questions about suspiciously low numbers from the police department, and the statements that they're putting in the chat are, in my opinion, borderline inappropriate. I want to make sure the commissioners, they get the data and compare the data to similar cities. South San Francisco is not Baltimore, it's not Los Angeles. You got to compare apples to apples. Compare the cities to a city of the same geographics, the same demographics. And I encourage the commission to consider that perhaps if some of these other cities that we see and hear about in the news had the policies and procedures in place that South San Francisco PD has with their command staff and leadership, that they may not have the problems that they're having based on the problem. We're not having the problems that we have here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I think Marcella?
Marcella, followed by Kanani Cortez.
Hi, thank you for taking my comment. I would just like to say that I was really blown away by Cesar Rodriguez's presentation. I think he made some excellent points that really helped us understand a more clear picture of what a world without police in every aspect of our city would look like. So focusing in on the data that he brought up data from police officers, over 900 police officers, I believe he said. And the data showed that the police officers themselves believe that they are being overworked and they should not be in all these different aspects of that they're currently dealing with, such as mental health calls, traffic calls. I think that's really an interesting point that the data was brought up from police officers. So furthermore, I think that police need to be held accountable, and I think we need that in our city. You know, I'll hear people say South City is different, but it wasn't too many years ago where a South City cop killed a 15-year-old boy, and he was only a couple years older than me. As a lifelong resident, this is something that is traumatizing, you know, when I see peers that are getting killed in the street and, you know, the police are not being held accountable by a group of citizens in our city. Furthermore, I think something that really astonishes me, again, as a lifelong resident, I went to all public schools in South San Francisco, and there are police in our schools armed, and they are arresting kids without an MOU present in our schools. And I know we're getting to education next year, but I just think that we really need to look at our city and realize, you know what, maybe we aren't that much different than all these other places. And it is important to look at data. But you know, data is being brought forward in these meetings. So systemic racism is real. Racism is real in South City, and that's why we're here today. And I really hope that the panel and other community members can really help or achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Kanani Cortez, you're up next.
Hi, my name is Kalani Cortez. I'm also a lifelong resident of South San Francisco, attended K through 12 in the SSF-UST. I just wanted to speak on some of the solutions proposed, specifically implicit bias training. I'd just like to clarify, I think the point that was trying to be made isn't that people think implicit bias training is useless, but it has not proven to reduce use of excessive force by police officers or reduction in police violence. So in the workplace, implicit bias might be great, right? To learn about some of your biases or internal racism that you hold and how it plays out in the workplace. But I think that there needs to be more there because there's a much larger issue with the power dynamic between police officers and regular residents or citizens. I'd also like to advocate for a citizen oversight board with firing powers. It really doesn't make sense to me to have circular conversations about whether or not we think the police department is good or bad. I don't really care about that conversation. I care more about police accountability, and I think that's what we're moving toward, not whether or not racism exists, because that's super Googleable if you're looking for that information. Thank you.
AS followed by a phone number ending in 2442, but first AS.
Oh yeah, this is Olga Perez. You know, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for this commission. I really appreciate it, especially today. I really wish to thank Professor Rodriguez for his presentation, and hoping that the commission takes his presentation and his data comes to fruition in South San Francisco. Having been raised myself and my children in Old Town, you know, I know all about the importance of an education, community involvement, and volunteering. You know, I still stress all of it and even more. You know, however, you know, there are circumstances and barriers that are unique in Old Town that do not allow for the same opportunities for everyone. You know, since my focus has always been on education, if I would like to comment that I believe it is very detrimental to students' livelihood and future if we continue to allow the police department or services to be a substitute for parents and at our schools. You know, my husband and I, we pride ourselves and we think we did a great job considering what we saw through the safety of our windows. You know, my sister's a probation officer and I highly respect and I understand the dangers that officers and probation officers face. However, there are all sorts of protections that the general public and in particular youth do not have. If the commission could please keep in mind the short and long-term dangers our youth face when being detained unlawfully or being approached by police officers. You know, I think in the end, I'm hoping that this commission truly sees the reality through our Black and brown community. If you place yourself in our shoes, you know, if everyone walks the streets of Old Town, you will really get to know what Old Town is about. You know, thank you very much. I truly appreciate this commission and the opportunity for me to speak. Thank you.
So I'm just going to comment a little bit on the chats that are happening. So I really want to invite people to contribute in a way that will help us move forward. So if you have questions or if you have information and data that you want the commission to consider, please bring it forward. I think it's not particularly helpful to use language that's going to derail the conversation. So I'm going to leave that up to you all to figure out what I'm talking about. But I really would like to bring forward specific information, whatever it is that you have that you want us to look at. We can look at it and bring it forward and discuss it. I really want to focus on the approaches that we're trying to get to, and I welcome divergent perspectives. I think that we're very interested in a range of perspectives, but we really want to keep it focused on approaches moving forward more than past events at the moment, unless we have information in front of us. So really want to welcome
it's
these
really
comments.
important that we're respectful, and to say that it's, I shouldn't bring up that South City killed a child is, it's just really inappropriate. So I would like to see more respect, like this was a child who died.
So, Chair Nicholas, did you want to take that?
Yes, I do. I know that it will come up sooner or later, and I agree. There is never an end to mourning, especially for a loss of life. It is a tragedy. So I would like to encourage all those who are interested to get the copy of the DA's decision, because you may not be informed of everything that happened during the tragedy. Like I said, it's very unfortunate because there was a loss of life, and especially of a young child. I am a mother, and so therefore I really truly understand. So for those who would like to get more information regarding Derek Gaines, please email Kim or Paige.
Yeah, and I really want to re-emphasize that we're going to take what's written in the chat and we'll take it back and we'll reflect on it, and we want to bring more information and data that we can really use to have a conversation about approaches moving forward. And so,
going back to public comment. Phone number ending in 2442, followed by Cesar. So 2442. There we go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. This is Patricia again. So something that no one has mentioned at all is officer mental health, specifically to illness that contributes to injustice. So another recommendation that I have to look into is a wellness program, and this is why. So I had the pleasure of taking the 33rd Citizens Police Academy that South City offers, and during their street survival class, the officers talked about residual effects of violence exposure with use of force, and I quote verbatim what was said by officers. Hold on. I've seen times that whatever happens, happens in the moment, and you don't remember what happened until afterwards. Sometimes I don't remember how many rounds I fired. That was followed up with, I can't block it out because you keep thinking about what happened and replaying it, end quote, okay? Then they showed a PowerPoint slide with bullet points of symptoms included: trouble sleeping, nightmares, crying, anxiety, numbness, guilt, okay, etc. I did not say that. They did. Those symptoms meet the diagnostic criteria for PTSD, which is a mental health condition, and manifested with personal consequences such as domestic violence and substance use, to name a few. When their personal issues are not addressed, they get carried through their egos, which causes a superiority complex disorder, which is also known as a grandiose delusion. Yet it is not openly discussed or promoted for healing, since receiving any type of help is stigmatized, especially when diagnosing meets for job disqualification. So basically, unresolved mental health illness reflects part of the reasons why there's injustice and unstable officers. And I know personally from experience, there's a handful of severely disturbed ones. So if you want to have sane and competent police, because they're not going anywhere, the mayor already said that, consider a wellness program. And I think that in turn will have a better effect towards the community. And that's it.
Thank you. And Cesar, I think you're up.
Thank you. I just wanted to share some comments that I've read some comments in the chat. You know, I want to thank all the commissioners for taking time out of their lives to do this very important work. And in particular, Commissioner Rivera, listen, I just want to acknowledge that she is a woman of color who has decided to take time out of her life in order to sit on this commission and has had the courage to share real perspectives and facts. And I'm concerned by some of the reactions to her willing to speak up, given the double standards that are applied to women, that we tolerate men, particularly racially enfranchised men, that is to say white men, if they demonstrate their emotion and they show their passion, that women of color, if they do the same thing, there are efforts to put them in their place, right? And so she's in a very, you know, she's going out of her way, taking a public position, in a public role, you know. And even if we may disagree on this, on this commission, I want to ensure that she's safe and that she's not being mistreated or targeted exceptionally by folks. And I encourage us all to focus on. I think that these conversations unfortunately become emotional and polarizing. And I invite us to think about that what has been shared are discussions about how to improve our city and how to be more effective in addressing real issues in ways that will prevent the kinds of situations that all of us want. No one here wants more interpersonal harm. No one here wants state violence. And that what's at stake here, what we have before us are opportunities to develop solutions that improve the well-being of lives and prevent these kinds of things for everyone involved. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you said that very, very well, Cesar, and I appreciate you underlining what I heard is we really do want to respect everyone's participation and make sure that people feel safe in diversion perspectives. We will take the comments that were made today and we'll look into if you have specific questions, if you want to bring up specific information that we haven't shared yet, we can definitely do that and consider that in as we go forward. Is there anyone else who wants to speak from the public? I think we have a hand from A and then Victoria.
Hi, my name is Alan. I heard a lot of discussion about data, and I just want to emphasize that data is not just numbers. I want to encourage, while the commission, researches and does all of this work, I want to encourage, I want to remind everyone that qualitative data is still data. So I encourage everyone to listen to community members. Policy, the outcome of policy implementation really depends on, the context of the community and the behavioral responses of the community. So I think it's really important that that the commission and that the city really talk to the community and listen to the responses. And to be honest, I don't really see any, in regard to police, I don't really see any outreach, any search for feedback, for complaints. I think that's what Commissioner Rivera was talking about earlier, is the low number of complaints. It's really hard to believe that there's only an average of 5 complaints every year. And regarding some early behavior too, in regard to the reaction from the chief, the behavior displayed really suggests that there's a bad faith engagement and a lack of genuine desire to actually listen to the community. So I really encourage the commission to listen to the voice of the people. And I would also, regarding the data, if we really want to talk about numbers, I really want to see some numbers of stops and police presence by neighborhood. And I hope that I hope the commission looks into that.
Thank you. I also, before we end tonight, I say it's 6:41. We have a couple more hands. I did want to just hear what's on the minds of commissioners, maybe briefly, before we say goodnight.
We have a few more.
So Victoria,
up, though.
Yeah, Victoria, I think you're next.
Hi there again. I just want to say it's really sad what's going on, but I think it's also important to realize that we need to, have a compromise. There's both sides, and we need to say it in a positive, understanding way. We need to be open to what others have to say, their experiences. I've seen the good and bad sides of, the police, but I know it's a hard job, and we don't always see what's happening in the background. A good example of having and fostering a good communication between like the police and the community. I mean, there's a program that Maurice Goodman, who worked in South San Francisco government before in like the school board, he started a program with Officer JJ in San Francisco called Operation Genesis, and it fosters good communication, and it helps the children to like learn more about the system, not only about the police, but also about the laws behind it. So I really think it's, we do need to change the system, but I don't think it's a good idea to totally just take it away, because I think there are positive aspects to the police. It's just that, the system, it's broken, but it just needs to be fixed. So thank you all for, what you've said, and I appreciate both sides, but at the same time, I would really like to hear people say what they have to say, but in a more positive light, because if you want someone to listen to you, it's a good idea to also be listening to them, or otherwise no one listens to one another and we just get stuck. So thank you for your time.
Sam, and then go ahead, Sam.
I would just like to say thank you to Professor Cesar Rodriguez for giving an amazing presentation and just giving light to everything that's been happening. But I just want to say that this commission has really lost sight of what it was meant to do. It's meant to talk about racism, yet we're making space for white comfortability, and we're not listening to the brown and black people in SSF. If this is a commission about racism, then we should be listening to them. And because at the end of the day, they are the ones that have to endure racism. This is not Kumbaya, where we tell black and brown communities to start trusting cops because they give teddy bears once a year, and then just brush the death of Derek Gaines under the rug, who was racially profiled and killed despite just being a kid. We can't act like Julio Alia, a Salvadorian man, wasn't beat by 13 SSF police officers for 15 minutes and act like that wasn't racism. It's really concerning when all these people are calling in and talking about, oh, I went to the police academy and they weren't racist. Obviously, they're going to put up a front. It's all propaganda. It's disheartening that they're trying to excuse like, oh, I went to the police academy, and then just like completely just forget that police officers let the death of Derek Gaines just be another statistic. And since no one really seems like everyone's talking about data, yet they won't listen to the data that Professor Che displayed, they're just kind of like turning a blind eye to it because it's showing that your little police department is actually racist. But since no one really seems to care about that, I'll just say it as a brown student in SSF USD schools, I see how Black and Latino boys are always targeted by your police department, and I yield my time.
Thank you. I think I just want to say again that I really appreciate the variety of perspectives that we've heard today. I think it's hard to have this conversation, and I know that a lot of people took risks in saying what they feel and have experienced. I also am curious if any of the commissioners have anything to say before we say goodnight. Gladys, looks like you have your hand up.
Yes. So hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, so I'm going to be brief. I hear a community that is in so much pain. Definitely, this event that happened hasn't had any closure, and unless, as uncomfortable as it is, we can't change what happened at this point. All we can do is see what we can do so this doesn't happen again. So I think that I hear a lot of defensiveness from people who support the police department and from the police department itself. The reality is that we need to face what happened. And I hope this is an opportunity to do that, because otherwise, without closure to what happened, that event that happened, I feel the community doesn't feel like their concerns and they're being heard. So the whole premise is having this commission is to really take that in, and we have to take it in because it did happen, and see what we can do to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Thank you, Gladys. Commissioner Pat, looks like you have your hand up. And you're muted.
Hi. I joined this commission because I want to see change. I want all voices to be heard. And I think that I would like to be part of the change. But I do think that we need to, it feels to me like there's name calling, or you know, a lot of like, it's not us versus them. It's like, how can we move forward and make things better? And I loved Cesar's presentation, and he gives us a lot of food for thought, things that we can look into moving forward. But really, we have to get away from us versus them. We have to get to a point where we're looking at what can we do to make things better. And that's my feeling.
Commissioner Mike.
Yeah, I know we're beyond time, and we've all been here. Thank you. But I want to echo what Commissioner Pat just said, with respect and an open mind and objectivity, and to follow the data. I wasn't going to speak, but I was bothered by a commissioner putting in the chat that the police should be abolished. If you're a commissioner on this commission, I would ask you to be objective and look at all sides and realize that whatever decision we make is not just for the Black or brown community. It's going to affect the safety of this entire city, and it's going to affect the safety of anyone who comes here, good or bad. And usually decisions like this have 2 and 3 and 4 effects down the line. So we need to study and make sure that we're making the right decisions. And that's not to say change won't happen. I think it will. I think we'll have some really good outcomes here. But I would ask my fellow commissioners to put their biases aside, just like I'm trying to put my biases aside. And I'm reading actually the same book that Kim is reading, as we're all on this journey together. But I would just ask that we all just try to be fair and kind to one another. So thank you.
And Commissioner Chair Nicholas.
Yeah, so it has happened again that some other incidents were brought up. And like we said, those were tragedies, and we are here to prevent those from happening again. Like what we set out in the beginning, we are here to find solutions to the issues. And hopefully this will be a socially equitable and just community. I request that everybody have an open mind. Thank you very much, Professor Rodriguez, for coming and sharing your ideas with us. Let us always make sure that we are in the same boat. So if you go do something to this boat, you will all be affected. You and I are brothers and sisters, and so therefore we should not be doing anything that will impair or hurt anybody. There's so much hate, and only love can heal us. So if you fight with hate, I think what we should do is really come down and, make a rational judgment, keep an open mind. This is not easy. And we know from the very start that we're going to have a very hard conversation. Thank you. And if there was any more, are there any more people who would like to address Commission?
Alternate Commissioner Andrea.
Yes, thank you. So I think first and foremost, there's kind of this misconception that people are speaking out of biases or anger or emotion, but I think as a commission and just as members of the community, we can't dismiss these people's expressions of frustration and of their experiences, because as it's been pointed out many times, like we all come from different walks of life on this commission, and we all have different experiences, but nonetheless, somebody's negative experience shouldn't be shunned down by somebody's positive experience. So I think that's just something that's very important, that, it's evident that the loudest and squeakiest voices are obviously getting the most attention rather than those who are most in need. So I think that's something that we need to keep in mind. And also too, it's important that we set the example on how we speak on traumatic experiences that have affected our community. Just really echoing what some of the community has shared in terms of the way that Derek Gaines was, the death of Derek Gaines was addressed and mentioned in this, I think in this meeting, is something that we need to keep in mind. We can't be dismissive of it. Of course, we can address it and everything, but I think we need to be just more cognizant of the fact that there's still, like it was mentioned, people suffering from the trauma of this loss, and there's still people mourning, and that trauma is only going to further more, other situations that may arise from it. So I think we can't be dismissive or disrespectful to the family. So just echoing the voices of the community on that.
Thank you. And again, I feel like I really appreciate that there have been so many participants. I think there were 105 people that participated today, 108, I think I counted at a particular point. And really appreciate all of your time that you took today to participate in this meeting. I think that it's indicative of how much you do care about South San Francisco, and we're taking that to heart. We heard you. And I really appreciate Cesar Rodriguez, your presentation, and the effort and time that it took for you to join us today. you know, even amidst the divergent perspectives, it did seem like we were able to look at a couple approaches that will bring back more information for you to consider, and we will try to find a way forward in this really difficult time and important time to find ways that make meaningful change.
Is it time to adjourn, Kim? Or any objection?
Just appreciating everyone's participation today.
Thank you.
It was a difficult but important conversation, and I really appreciate it.
Meeting is adjourned.
Take care.